McQuestion, talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study and Teaching of the Science of Self-Government, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future, Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.
You know, as we continue in our 25th year on TV, our program this week is the second in a three-part series on immigration. In part one, we examine the history of immigration, particularly immigration from Mexico. On this program, we'll look at what happened from 1990 and into 2015. You'll hear from some of our favorite experts who've appeared on the program in the last 25 years, and you'll hear from our experts in the studio as well, so let's meet them now. Starting on my left is Rick Gump. Rick is a lawyer who handled his first immigration client over 40 years ago. Is that right, Rick?
42.
42 years ago. He works with companies and individuals on all types of immigration issues, from getting them in and taking care of them when they've got problems. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
Rick, thank you for coming.
You betcha.
Sitting next to you is Pia Arenia. She's Vice President and Senior Economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. She's an adjunct professor at Baylor. She's a research fellow at the Tower Center at SMU, and was a senior economist on the Council of Economic Advisors in the Executive Office of the President in 2004 and 2005. Pia, you've also written this book, and this book is called Beside the Golden Door, and I'm going to ask you to tell us in a minute what that means. So it's a very interesting book on immigration. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
And next to you is Hippolito Acosta. He began his government career with the Border Patrol in 1975. He's an award-winning career with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, has included stints in the Philippines, Monterrey, Juarez, Mexico City, and Houston. Today he's managing partner of P&G Global Associates and the author of this book, which is called The Shadow Catchers. And subtitle of this is A U.S. Agent Infiltrates Mexico's Deadly Crime Cartels. Poli, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, to bring us up to date, we talked about the whole history up to 1990, but give that viewer a little bit of the 1986 law and then what it did up to 1990 from your perspective.
Well, one of the things that we saw was that more than 3 million undocumented aliens were granted some type of status in the United States, were legalized in essence through the amnesty provisions of the Act. It also had provisions to fine employers who abuse the system by illegally employing people who were not entitled to work in the United States. Then we moved on to 1990 with the Immigration Act of 1990 that was passed under President Bush. And what we saw, it expanded the number of family-based visas that were being issued to immigrants. As a consequence, during the 90s, it was a decade where we saw 10 to 11 million people immigrate to the United States. That was the highest rate of immigrants coming into the United States in many decades. And of course, it continued. In 1996, we had another law that was commonly known as IRA, which also added enforcement provisions to the law, but we continued seeing there were certain benefits that were being granted, more resources along the border, wiretap authority on some cases that I'm glad to say I was, along with A.J. Irwin, an agent here in Dallas, we were the first ones to lead the first wiretap case in our agency. So it gave us more enforcement authority. But illegal immigration continued to the United States until what we have today.
Okay. Now, Pia, this particular title, Beside the Golden Door, is part of a poem or something, so tell us about that first.
Well, it's a reference to the poem, the famous poem by Emma Lazarus that's inscribed in the bottom of the Statue of Liberty in New York. And it's a reference to, why so many immigrants come to America, for economic opportunity and freedom. And I think as we discuss immigration policy and all its sordid details, that we need to remember why people come.
All right. Now, one of the things that has been said, he just alluded to it just a moment ago, but on our first program we talked about it quite a bit, and that's what the act in 65 and 86 did really focused on family. Talk to us about family versus the case that you're making in your book for an economic reason for immigration.
Well, in the book we discuss in terms of when you do immigration reform, really what we argue is that you should do it in the national interest. And to have immigration reform in the national interest, and you're talking about economics, you really want to focus on employment-based immigration and a system that works with legal immigration more than illegal immigration, because you want to have some kind of parameters around which immigration is occurring. And when you have economic-based immigration reform, you're going to prioritize employment-based and high-skilled immigrants, because what the research overwhelmingly shows is that's where the biggest payoff is for the economy. That doesn't mean you don't need low-skilled workers. You do need them. Obviously, there need to be programs in place to bring them here legally.
All right. Now, Rick, this sort of steps into your place here. So I want to take you back 42 years ago. And what was the problem in your early years that was an immigration? What got you started into immigration law?
Well, I've always been interested in history, and goes back to my ancestor who came over in the 1700s and fought in the American Revolution and lived to be 108 years old. But I became interested in immigration law mainly because we were representing a bank, and there was a person from China, professor at the University of Kansas, who wanted to open a Chinese restaurant. He had a lot of trouble bringing in an investor and chefs, and actually at the firm, I was brought into it, not because I knew anything about it, but I was the youngest person, and I didn't have a clue about immigration, but no one else did as well. So I took it upon myself and really enjoyed learning how difficult a process it is to bring people in and get them legally able to work. Now back then, it was really less the employer's problem than it was the individuals, because there was no punishment for the employer that existed at that time. So it was looking for the appropriate visas that would help, whether it be employers bring the people they wanted in or families unite. And it's during that time, for a 10-year period when I was learning about it, I realized the complexity as well as the deficient policies that we have.
Well, when you said complexity, I've said this on this program, and that person watching knows that I have, that of all the issues we've talked about, I think immigration is probably as complex as any of them. And Pia, one of the reasons for that complexity is this apparent disconnect between, let's say, the human aspect and the work aspect, the low-skilled people and the high-skilled people. So give us some of that dynamic that showed up in your research.
Well, what the research shows is basically a reflection of the policies that we've put in place. So we have obviously had a lot of illegal immigration to the United States over the last few decades. The reason for that is largely because of we've had a lot of economic opportunity for these workers. We're also very close to these workers, with them being in Mexico and Central America, so they can easily come over. But we have no legal provisions for them. There's no legal way for them to basically come and work. So there's demand, there's supply, and there's just no legal way for them so they've come anyway. On the high end, we actually do have a pretty well-developed legal structure to bring in high-skilled workers. We have temporary visas, we have permanent visas, we just don't have enough of them. And the interesting thing is that the laws are designed sort of with these set quotas for these high-skilled workers, and these quotas don't grow with the economy. So if the economy doubles, the number of visas we have for high-skilled workers is the same, which is another troubling aspect of current immigration policy.
Well, now that sounds great, but Rick, I mean, some people would say we don't want high-skilled workers here. They're just taking American jobs. We've got a problem already with low-skilled workers taking low-skilled people's jobs, and surely we don't want a bunch of smart people from China and all over the world here who are smart and have PhDs. We don't want students of mine, like the one sitting back here in the audience, to come here. We want to send her back home, don't we?
Well, there might be a counter argument to that. I was sitting on an airplane, this has been 10 years ago, and the fellow didn't know what I did, and he said, well, I'm a lawyer for this particular company, and he said, we have just given up trying to get these people over here on these so-called H-1B visas, so I'm flying to London in order to open a subsidiary so we can bring people from India and China in order to do the work that we need done. And it was about the same time that Microsoft had decided to open up a large plant in Canada for the same reason. So it's counterintuitive, but it's just the opposite effect. If you don't bring in the talent that you need, it actually creates jobs. An interesting fact, in 1990, when they doubled the number of employment-based green cards, employment in the United States actually rose for U.S. citizens.
Interesting. Well, now that's something that a lot of people don't pay attention to, something called the facts. It's really a big problem, but we have that. Now, you're going to be interested in Polly, when we come out of this video clip, I'm going to ask you to respond to this, because over the years we've done several programs on immigration. You will hear people say we need to open the borders. You will hear people say we need to close the borders. And since we haven't closed the borders, probably we're going to blame pretty much everything on you. So if you're ready, let's run that video, please. Immigration is a human rights issue, a jobs issue, a welfare issue, a national security issue, a cultural issue, and much more. And as many of you know, this is not the first time we have addressed this issue. In fact, before we meet the expert today, what I'd like you to do is take a quick look back at what one of our experts said on this program just a few years ago.
I have never met harder working people than the illegal aliens that are in these incarceration centers. Family oriented, strong family values, religious. And we're jailing them. We're building a Berlin Wall on the southern border of the United States. This is inconsistent with a great nation, a nation that prides itself on freedom. We say it's time to recapture the principles of open immigration and freedom on which this country was founded.
Immigration is part of the founding myth, really, of this country. But we have gone through 4 great waves of immigration in our history. The founding sort of colonial wave, which was largely English. The second wave, which started around 1820 and went up through about 1870, which was a German and an Irish wave of immigrants. The Germans are still the largest single group historically to immigrate to this country. Of all immigrants that ever came here, still about 15% of them were German. Then we had a third great wave of immigration that started late in the 19th century and went on right up until World War I. And today, Dennis, we are in the 4th great wave of immigration in our history, and we're still riding that wave. It's still going on today. So this is a country that certainly was built on immigration, and immigration has always been controversial.
Amnesty is, of course, when you refuse to apply the penalty to the crime or to the law that has been violated, and that's what's happening here. This was a bad plan for 2 reasons. It's lousy public policy because it rewards people for breaking the law, and 2, it's lousy politics because all it does is make liberals mad because it doesn't go far enough, and conservatives even madder because you proposed it. So what's the deal here? What's the payoff?
Well, and he went on to say in the latter part of his speech something like this.
Before you can even begin to talk about anything called a guest worker program, you have to do 2 things. You have to, in fact, secure your border, and number 2, you have to enforce internal immigration law. That means you have to go after every single employer. In my bill, we double the penalty. We quadruple the number of people who would go after people who are hiring people here illegally. You have to absolutely do something about the demand side of this. I have attacked every single organization, corporation that I know of anyway, including Walmart, by the way, that has skirted the law, or in fact, not just skirted, but blatantly, egregiously violated the law. They should pay a fine, a penalty, and some of those folks should go to jail. Because if you do that, you begin to start a process where you don't have to, quote, round up 13 million people and deport them. You begin a process by which these folks, when there are no jobs available to them because they have broken the law when they came in here, will return home. You have to start making some very tough decisions here. America does, and it has to make it through its elected representatives or, in town meeting. It has to make these decisions. Every single American has to think about this. They have to look at whether they want an America as described by Jacob, no borders, just a place on a continent inhabited by residents, not citizens, just people who are here, gathered together around one set of principles, almost all economic in nature, just a better life, 2-car garage, home in suburbia. Is that the world you want to live in? Because you can't even say country. It's really not a country at that point in time. But you have to make this decision. Do you believe in borders or not? That's the first question you have to ask yourself. Are they important? Do they matter? On the other hand, if you decide that borders are important, that they do matter, then you have to think about what that means. If you have them, are you willing to actually enforce them?
Okay, Poley, so you see what I mean there? It's all your fault. Isn't that about right?
No, it's the congressman's fault.
Oh, the Congress.
Yeah, you know, I think it's extremely important that I don't completely disagree with the congressman, but I think he has it backwards, and we see a lot of that today when we see folks in positions of leadership that say we will not address this immigration issue until we secure or shut the borders, and it's not going to happen. It's the other way around. Extending the security of the border actually commences with interior enforcement, Dennis, when we actually hold the employers accountable, when there are no jobs for people to come into the country, when there's no magnets. It happened in 1986, and it's happening right now with the executive order that we hear about that was signed recently. So I don't disagree with him, but I think it's backwards. We should do the interior enforcement. We should control what we have inside the country, and that, in essence, extends the security to the border. That's the way to take the approach.
Pia.
Oh, I think Polly is exactly right. I mean, if you look at the economics of border enforcement, what you do is close off the border, you reduce the supply of the undocumented worker and increase their wages. So now if they manage to get across the border, they get an even higher wage than they would have. So there's really, and I agree, you have to have a system that works, a system that's legal, and a system that's enforced. But in order to do that, you have to have enforcement, interior enforcement, and probably also border enforcement. The key is, though, that this has to be done at the same time that you have comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, what happened to us in the last 5 years, basically, or last 10 years, is that we had a lot of enforcement, but nobody took care of the undocumented immigrants that were here to the numbers of 10, 12 million. And so what we started doing was applying these harsh interior enforcement rules against undocumented immigrants, and they were getting caught up in the web, and we've had record deportations, and we've had a lot of human suffering. The only argument we make, and we make it in the book that you showed earlier, is that all of this should come as a package deal. You should have comprehensive immigration reform and better enforcement all at the same time and start fresh.
All right, and then he just alluded to President Obama's executive order. How does that affect you and all the things you look at?
You know, part of the comment has to be an understanding that we've just been developing over the years a culture of compliance since '86, since they changed the law and made junior immigration cops out of employers. We handled the 13th case that was filed. We've watched this enforcement go for a long period of time, and I think it's appropriate. The problem is we're mopping the floor without fixing the roof. And fixing the roof means taking a 25-year-old visa system that doesn't allow supply to meet demand in a meaningful way, and we need to get it changed. Now, with regard to the executive order, one of the interesting things, it helps families, but it also has a lot of employer reform in it as well. And what would have been interesting, and we'll get into it in the next segment, not this one, to talk about what policies should be, but if Obama and the Senate and the House, if they had all gotten together and they had come up and agreed on a plan, it would not be, in my opinion, with compromise obviously, dissimilar to what you have, because the groups, the family groups that are being allowed to stay if the executive order holds up, they're the core people, and it's likely that they'd be the first ones that would get a form of forgiveness or amnesty or whatever you want to call it. A lot of reform, though, that has been discussed and nobody pays attention to is on the employer side, helping entrepreneurs and investors and expanding the visa system. Those are things that if you don't do them in tandem, as Pia said, you're going to continue to have problems.
Okay. Well, we have an unintended problem that came along. Marcella, if you'll stand up here for just a minute, I'll hold this for you. I'm going to look at some slides. And first, Marcella, if you would be kind enough to tell that person who you work for and why you're here.
Sure. I work for the Human Rights Initiative of North Texas, and we work with clients who come and immigrate for actually different reasons than economic reasons. Our clients are victims of human rights abuses, of violence, of torture in their home countries. And I specifically work with immigrant children who we've been hearing a lot about recently. So.
Yeah, well, we've had hundreds, if not thousands, of those here. I'm going to look at a series of slides very quickly, and I'm going to ask you to tell us about it. So if we look at those slides right now, let's start with number one. And I think it has basically the mission that you guys are trying to do. I'm not going to read that to everybody, but what you're trying to do, I think, is some support services to those folks, in your case, particularly the children. Is that right?
Yes, we work with a large group of volunteer attorneys to represent our clients, and they're in immigration court and in front of USCIS.
All right, and then let's look at the next slide. These are the people you help, and we're not going to talk about asylum and violence against women, but they're the special immigrant juvenile status. Is that the one?
Yes, those are the kids that I work with primarily.
All right, and next slide, please. And this is a huge study here, unaccompanied children release data. And if I'm reading, it's a little hard to read there, but the state of Texas has 7,400 people, I guess, in 2004.
In 2014, the fiscal year ran through October of 2014. So we had 7,400 children reunified with family members here in the U.S.
All right, and then New York and then California were big states as well.
Exactly, yes. And so Texas was the leading state.
All right. Now, this is unaccompanied alien children encountered by fiscal year. And if I'm looking at those numbers right, it almost doubled from 2013 to 2014. Is that right?
Yes, and as you see, this is a large number of children, and this is just representative of the children, not general immigration.
All right. Okay. And now let's look at that next slide, please. All right. And this is really a definition of what all this. We're not going to read that, but if anybody wants to stop their VCR here and read all that, but basically you're looking at cases where the child is 17 years old or younger and unmarried. Is that right?
Yes. And it is 17 years or younger, unmarried. Well, Human Rights Initiative takes cases with children who are 17 years or younger. Under immigration law, they have to be subject to a state court's family court.
All right, good. And then finally, the last one, that's the current status. What does that slide mean to us?
Well, it shows you that Texas, and this is the Dallas Immigration Court, there is a large spike in juvenile cases that our court's judges have to see. We have children who go through the immigration docket, and again, this is just children, not representative of all immigrant cases.
Would it be fair to say that you're busier than we would like you to be?
We are incredibly busy, but it's good because we're representing these children. Children who go to immigration court without an attorney and they do not have a right to have an attorney, about 73% of those children were ordered removed or deported. When these children went with an attorney, it was about 36% of children who were removed because those other percentage of children actually had relief under U.S. immigration law.
Well, that's the part of this thing that it's easy just to talk about economic statistics with an economist and a lawyer, but this is really the human part of this whole equation, isn't it?
It is. And we're fortunate we have a great pro bono community in Dallas who have attorneys who help us with that.
Good. Thank you for being here, Marcella.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate what you do. Okay, thanks very much. Well, so from the border standpoint, you've heard stories like this all over the place. What's the difference today? Here we are in 2015. What's the difference today in terms of these stories, et cetera, that you're seeing, and what would you say to that person watching, Polly?
Well, one of the things that we have seen, the increase on illegal immigrants coming into the country is a consequence of what we're seeing today, because we use the term unaccompanied minors that are coming into the United States, but many of those minors actually have family members that made that journey to the United States, enter the country illegally, are working here, and actually paid smugglers to bring their children into the United States. I also want to make another very important point. When you have, in a summer, you have 60,000 children that supposedly traveled from Central America to the Mexican border and into the United States. It's not possible to think that children as young as 7, 8, 11 years old were actually coming unaccompanied. You have to recall that during that same period of time, the U.S. Border Patrol apprehended about 125,000 people that included adults. So they were traveling with many of these children. Our system of illegal immigration over many years has a consequence of what we're seeing today. And we need to address that particular issue because no attention was ever given to the illegal population that was growing, later on bringing their children, and this is what we have today.
Okay, Pia, we just have a minute or so left. Give us some thoughts as we close this segment.
Yeah, I think when you have a patchwork, haphazard, random approach to immigration policy, this is the type of result that you get. I mean, obviously, when smugglers are making thousands of dollars off of each person they bring to the United States, they're going to go to Central America and try to round up as many children as they can and bring them here. And I think that it's the government's responsibility to address this type of problem with a comprehensive solution.
All right. If not, give them a lawyer like Rick who'll charge
That's
them a lot of money. Rick, what do you think? You have the last word.
Listen, I agree with both of them. The key from 1990, though, until today has been we've had a roller coaster of enforcement, particularly against employers. You get actively against them, and then nothing happens. And so, if you're trying to develop a culture of compliance, you need to be consistent. You need to be fair. And around 2009, we brought a lot of criminal cases. Well, that made a lot of headlines. The problem with it is it used a lot of resources but hit few employers. Now, since 2009, the process is a notice of inspection and you do an audit. Now, the audits have got lots and lots of employers talking, trust me, and I think that's very important. Just like tax laws, you've got to enforce and do it consistently.
All right. Thank you very much, all three of you. And as you can tell, the last 25 years have truly been controversial, to say the least. So we hope you'll go online at McQuestionTV.com to see part 1 of this series, and that you'll join us next week for part 3, when we try to come up with viable solutions to this public policy issue. We'll discuss whether we should open or shut the borders, provide amnesty again, deport millions, or find a sensible approach somewhere in between. We've been talking about things that matter with people who care. How quickly the time.
A DVD of this program is available for $20 plus $5 postage and handling, and in Texas, applicable tax. For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email nikkien@nikkimcquestion.com. Visit our website at www.mcquestiontv.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McQuestionTV or download McQuestion TV video podcasts on iTunes. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study and Teaching of the Science of Self-Government, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future, Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.